The funny thing about being invisible is that people will show you exactly who they are. I learned that on a Thursday night beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than my entire apartment building. My name is Hannah Carter, and at 27 years old, I spent most of my nights carrying silver trays through rooms filled with people who never bothered to look directly at me. The Grand Lexington Hotel stood 12 stories above downtown Manhattan, glowing against the spring rain like a palace built for people who had never worried about rent. I worked there 5 nights a week, serving champagne to executives, politicians, celebrities, and anyone wealthy enough to believe a glass of sparkling wine tasted better when it cost $40. By 7 o'clock, the ballroom was already full. The air smelled like expensive perfume, polished marble, and money. Soft violin music drifted through the room while servers in black uniforms moved silently between tables. I adjusted the collar of my jacket and balanced a tray of drinks on one hand. My feet already hurt. I'd been on them for nearly 10 hours. Table 16, my manager called from across the room. Move a little faster, Hannah. I nodded without arguing. I never argued. People tended to assume quiet meant weak. Sometimes it was easier to let them believe that. As I crossed the ballroom, I caught my reflection in one of the mirrored walls. Brown hair pulled into a simple bun. Round cheeks. Tired blue eyes. A body that had never fit the image magazines insisted women should chase. I looked away quickly. There were enough reminders in the world without helping them. 2 women standing near the champagne tower glanced in my direction. One whispered something to the other. Both laughed. I didn't hear the words. I didn't need to. After years of practice, I could recognize that look from across a football field. The look that said someone had already decided who you were before you opened your mouth. I kept walking. That's what invisible people do. We keep moving. We smile. We refill glasses. We pretend not to notice. Around 8:30, the atmosphere shifted. It happened gradually at first. Conversations lowered. Heads turned. Security personnel near the entrance straightened their posture. Even the event coordinator checked her watch and smoothed her dress. I noticed because noticing things was part of survival. The ballroom doors opened. Rain from outside glistened briefly on polished black shoes. Then he walked in. I didn't know his name yet. I only knew the effect he had on the room. He wasn't the tallest man there. He wasn't even the loudest. But somehow every eye followed him anyway. Dark suit. Broad shoulders. Calm expression. The kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself. People moved aside without being asked. Men twice his age offered handshakes first. Women smiled a little wider when he passed. Power has a scent. Not literally. But if you've spent enough time around wealthy people, you learn to recognize it. And this man carried enough of it to fill the entire ballroom. I watched from across the room while pretending to arrange glasses. One of the bartenders leaned toward me. "That's Vincent Moretti," he whispered. "Big deal." I frowned. "How big?" The bartender laughed quietly. "Big enough that you don't ask questions." Then he walked away before I could ask another. Vincent Moretti. The name settled somewhere in my mind. He moved toward a private table near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by several men dressed almost identically. Not bodyguards exactly. Something else. Something sharper. More alert. I turned away before anyone noticed me staring. After all, people like Vincent Moretti didn't notice women like me. Nobody did. At least that's what I believed. Then, as I lifted a tray and glanced across the room one more time, I found his eyes already looking directly at me. For a second, I thought I was mistaken. Men like Vincent Moretti did not look at women like me. They looked through us. Past us. Around us. But when I glanced toward his table again, his attention shifted away only after a beat too long to be accidental. A strange warmth crept into my face. I immediately lowered my eyes and focused on work. The ballroom was busier than ever now. More guests continued arriving despite the rain outside. Crystal glasses clinked softly beneath the chandeliers while servers moved between crowded tables carrying appetizers and drinks. I reminded myself that whatever had just happened meant nothing. Maybe he had been looking at someone standing behind me. Maybe he had simply been scanning the room. Powerful people noticed everything. That did not mean they noticed me. Nearly an hour passed before I saw him again. I was delivering a fresh bottle of sparkling water to a table near the ballroom's western wall, when a sudden burst of laughter erupted from a group of investors seated nearby. One of them waved me over without even looking at me. I smiled politely and refilled their glasses. That was when I noticed Vincent standing near a private lounge entrance across the room. He was speaking with 3 men in tailored suits. They appeared relaxed on the surface, but something about the conversation felt different. The others kept glancing around before speaking. Their smiles never quite reached their eyes. Years of serving wealthy guests had taught me something unexpected. People revealed more when they believed nobody important was watching. And because nobody considered me important, I often noticed things others missed. I finished my task and headed toward the service station near the bar. As I passed one of the cocktail tables, I nearly collided with a man stepping backward without looking. He caught himself immediately. "Sorry," he said. "My fault." I nodded. "No problem." The interaction lasted less than 3 seconds, but something felt off. His smile arrived a little too late. His eyes moved too quickly. And instead of returning to the crowd, he adjusted his jacket and headed directly toward the private lounge area where Vincent and the others were meeting. I watched him go before forcing myself to continue working. "Stop imagining things, Hannah," I told myself. Not every nervous man in Manhattan was part of some secret drama. Still, the feeling stayed with me. Around 9:45, the event coordinator requested additional drink service near the lounge section. I loaded a silver tray with whiskey glasses and carefully made my way through the crowd. The closer I got, the quieter the atmosphere seemed. Not silent, just more controlled, more deliberate. The kind of environment where every word mattered. Vincent had returned to the central ballroom by then. He sat at a reserved table surrounded by influential guests. Conversations flowed easily around him, but his posture remained alert, calm, observant, like someone who never fully relaxed. I began distributing drinks. One glass here, another there. Everything routine, everything normal. Then I saw the same man from earlier. He appeared beside a side table near Vincent's group. Nobody paid much attention to him. Why would they? He looked like he belonged there. Expensive suit, confident smile, perfectly ordinary. Yet something tightened in my chest when I noticed his hand hovering briefly near one of the glasses waiting to be served. The movement lasted less than a second, small enough that most people would never have noticed it. But I did, because I happened to be looking at exactly the right moment. And suddenly I could not shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I should have looked away. That would have been the smart thing to do. Finish my shift, collect my paycheck, go home to my tiny apartment in Queens and forget whatever I thought I had seen. Instead, I stood there holding a silver tray while my heart beat hard enough to shake the glasses resting on top of it. The man had only touched the table for a moment, less than a second, yet something about the movement felt deliberate, careful, practiced. I watched him disappear into the crowd while every instinct told me to pay attention. The problem was that I had no proof, no evidence, just a feeling. And feelings were not exactly a reliable source of information. Around me, the gala continued without interruption. Laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers. Waiters moved between tables. Wealthy guests discussed investments, charities, and vacation homes. Nobody seemed concerned. Nobody seemed aware that anything unusual had happened. I tried to focus on my work. I really did. But my eyes kept drifting back toward Vincent's table. He was speaking with an older businessman now, listening more than talking. His expression remained calm, controlled. The same expression I imagined he wore during every important conversation in his life. Then a server approached his table carrying a fresh round of drinks. My stomach tightened instantly. One glass in particular caught my attention. Amber liquid, crystal tumbler. The exact position where I had seen the stranger's hand pause only minutes earlier. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. I had worked 6 straight days. My feet hurt. My back hurt. I had skipped dinner. There were dozens of reasonable explanations. Yet the uneasy feeling refused to leave. The server placed the drinks on the table and stepped away. Vincent reached for his glass. My breath stopped. Not completely. Just enough that everything seemed to freeze for a second. The music faded into the background. Conversations blurred into meaningless noise. All I could see was his hand moving toward the drink. If I was wrong, I would look ridiculous. If I was right, I did not want to finish that thought. My pulse hammered in my ears. Before I could talk myself out of it, I started walking. Fast enough to reach the table. Slow enough not to attract attention. The tray in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Vincent's fingers touched the glass. I was running out of time. Think, Hannah. Think. Then an idea appeared. Terrible. Risky. Completely unprofessional. But it was all I had. I stepped beside the table with my most practiced service smile. "Excuse me, sir," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I am so sorry. The bar asked us to replace these glasses. There was a presentation issue." The excuse was absurd. I knew it. But before anyone could question me, I gently lifted the tumbler from directly in front of Vincent and replaced it with another from my tray. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. Smooth. Silent. Invisible. Exactly the way waitresses were expected to be. A few guests glanced at me before returning to their conversations. Nobody seemed concerned. Nobody except Vincent. When I looked up, his hand had stopped halfway to the table. Those dark eyes locked onto mine. Sharp. Focused. Watching. And, for the second time that night, I realized he had seen everything. My legs felt weak the moment our eyes met. Not because he looked angry. Not because he looked confused. Because he looked like a man putting together pieces of a puzzle faster than anyone else in the room. I forced myself to keep smiling. The way waitresses are trained to smile. Pleasant. Professional. Forgettable. Then I turned and walked away before my nerves could betray me. Every step felt unnatural. I could practically feel his gaze following me across the ballroom. Maybe I had imagined that too. Maybe tonight had finally broken my exhausted brain. I reached the service station near the kitchen entrance and set my tray down with shaking hands. "You okay?" another server asked. "You look pale." I laughed nervously. "Long day." She nodded. Everyone accepted long days as an explanation in our line of work. Nobody asked further questions. I grabbed a pitcher of water and pretended to organize glasses while secretly watching Vincent's table through the reflection in a mirrored column. First, nothing happened. Guests continued talking. Waiters continued serving. The violin quartet continued playing near the stage. Then Vincent did something unexpected. Instead of drinking from the replacement glass, he set it down untouched. A few minutes later, one of the men seated beside him leaned closer. They exchanged several quiet words. The conversation lasted only seconds. The man immediately stood and left the table. Not rushed. Not alarmed. Calm. Deliberate. Like someone carrying out an instruction. A strange chill ran through me. I could not explain why. 20 minutes passed. The ballroom remained elegant and cheerful on the surface, but something underneath had changed. I could feel it. The same way sailors probably sense a storm before seeing clouds. The man who had left eventually returned. He approached Vincent from behind and bent slightly to speak near his ear. Vincent listened without reacting.
No surprise. No visible emotion.
Nothing. Yet somehow the atmosphere around him became even more controlled than before. Then Vincent slowly turned his head. Directly toward me. My stomach dropped. There were hundreds of people in that ballroom. Hundreds. Yet somehow his attention landed exactly where I stood. For several seconds he simply watched. Not accusing. Not hostile. Observing. Studying. I looked away first. A few minutes later my manager appeared beside me. "Hannah." "Yes." "Private table in the East Lounge requested service. They specifically asked for you." My heart skipped. Me. That is what they said. He shrugged. "Do not ask me why. Just go." Every instinct told me this was connected. I picked up a tray and walked toward the private lounge. The farther I moved from the ballroom, the quieter everything became. Plush carpets absorbed footsteps. Soft lighting replaced the bright glow of the main event. By the time I reached the lounge entrance, my pulse was racing. A man in a dark suit opened the door without speaking. Inside, only a handful of people occupied the room. Vincent sat near the windows overlooking rain-covered Manhattan. The city lights reflected across the glass like scattered stars. He looked up as I entered. "Miss Carter," he said calmly. Hearing my name from his mouth startled me more than it should have. I had never introduced myself. "How do you know my name?" The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. "You are not the only person in this room who notices details." Then his eyes shifted toward the empty chair across from him. "Please sit down. There is something I would like to ask you about that glass." For a moment I considered lying. Seemed like the safest option. Pretend I had made a random mistake. Pretend I had grabbed the wrong glass. Pretend none of this had happened. But something about Vincent Moretti made dishonesty feel useless. Those steady eyes remained fixed on me, patient and impossible to read. Rain streaked down the enormous windows behind him, turning the Manhattan skyline into a watercolor painting of silver and gold lights. I lowered myself into the chair across from him and folded my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. "I am not sure what you mean," I said carefully. Vincent leaned back slightly. "You replaced a drink that was intended for me." Not a question. A statement. My throat tightened. "I work with drinks all night. Sometimes mistakes happen." One of the men standing near the wall almost smiled. Vincent did not. "You do not strike me as someone who makes careless mistakes." Silence filled the room. I looked down at the polished wooden table. Every instinct told me to leave. Yet another part of me knew that walking away would only make things worse. "I saw something," I admitted quietly. Vincent did not move. "What did you see?" "I do not know exactly." I hated how uncertain that sounded. "There was a man near your table earlier. He touched one of the glasses. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I imagined it. But something felt wrong." Vincent exchanged a brief glance with the man standing beside him. It lasted less than a second. "And because of a feeling you intervened?" I laughed nervously. "When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous." "Does it?" he asked. His voice remained calm. "Most people ignore feelings that inconvenience them." I looked up. For the first time that evening, I noticed the exhaustion hidden beneath his composed exterior. Not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. The kind carried by people responsible for too much. "I did not want someone getting hurt because I stayed quiet," I said. The room grew still. Vincent studied me for several seconds. Long enough to make me uncomfortable. Long enough to make me wonder if I had just made a terrible mistake. Finally he nodded once. "The glass is being examined." My pulse quickened. Examined. Tested. He spoke casually, as if discussing weather forecasts. "If there was nothing unusual, then you have nothing to worry about." That should have reassured me. Somehow it did not. "And if there was something unusual?" His expression remained unreadable. "Then you may have prevented a very serious problem." The words settled heavily between us. I stared at him. He stared back. Somewhere beyond the lounge walls, music continued playing in the ballroom. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. The gala carried on as if nothing important had happened. Yet my entire evening had somehow shifted course. Vincent folded his hands on the table. "Tell me something, Hannah." Hearing my first name still startled me. "What? Why did you risk your job for a stranger?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The answer seemed embarrassingly simple. Because nobody else noticed. Something changed in his eyes then. Not dramatically, just enough that I caught it. A flicker of respect. Maybe surprise. Before either of us could speak again, the lounge door opened. One of his associates stepped inside carrying a small sealed envelope. He crossed the room quickly and handed it to Vincent without a word. Vincent opened it. "Read the contents." Then his entire expression became very still. Slowly, he lifted his gaze back to me. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "it appears your instincts were correct." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. The words seemed too large for the room. Too large for me. I stared across the table while rain traced silver lines down the glass behind him. "Correct," I repeated quietly. Vincent placed the paper back inside the envelope. The drink contained a substance that should not have been there. His tone remained calm, but the men around him exchanged serious looks. My mouth went dry. Suddenly the ballroom downstairs felt very far away. The music, the laughter, the endless parade of smiling faces. It all belonged to another world. So I was not imagining it. Vincent shook his head once. No. A strange mix of relief and fear rushed through me. Relief that I had not acted on nonsense. Fear because my instincts had been right. I had noticed something real. Something important. I looked toward the windows. Manhattan glittered beyond the rain, unaware of the conversation happening several stories above the street. What happens now? I asked. One of the men near the wall answered before Vincent could. We find out who was responsible. Vincent lifted a hand slightly. The man fell silent immediately. The gesture was subtle, yet it carried complete authority. Vincent returned his attention to me. What happens now is that you go home. I blinked. That is it. That is enough for tonight. His answer should have comforted me. Instead, something about it sounded incomplete. Like he was carefully choosing which truths to share and which ones to keep to himself. He studied me for another moment. When does your shift end? Midnight. You will not be finishing it. I frowned. I cannot just leave. My manager will fire me. No, he will not. The certainty in his voice startled me. Before I could argue, one of his associates quietly stepped from the room. Vincent leaned back in his chair. You have spent your entire evening taking care of other people. Consider this the first good decision someone has made on your behalf. I almost laughed. Nobody had ever described me that way before. Most people barely notice me at all. You do not even know me, I said. I know enough. His gaze never wavered. You saw something everyone else missed. You acted when remaining silent would have been easier. That tells me more about your character than most conversations. The words landed harder than they should have. I looked away. Compliments always made me uncomfortable, especially sincere ones. A soft knock interrupted the moment. The associate returned and quietly handed Vincent a phone. Vincent listened for several seconds. His expression remained unreadable. Then he thanked the caller and ended the conversation. Something shifted in the room. Not panic. Not urgency. Just focus. The kind that appears when people begin connecting pieces together. Vincent placed the phone on the table. Miss Carter. Yes. Did anyone speak to you tonight? Anyone unusual? I thought carefully. The man near the table earlier. The strange smile. The brief collision. Maybe. Vincent nodded as though he had expected that answer. If you remember anything else, I would like to know. Before I could respond, the lounge door opened once more. This time my manager stepped inside looking unusually nervous. He glanced from Vincent to me. Then he cleared his throat. Hannah, your shift is over. A car is waiting downstairs. Confusion flooded through me. A car. My manager nodded quickly. Vincent remained silent. And that was the exact moment I realized someone had already decided I was not going home alone tonight. The elevator ride down felt surreal. 5 minutes earlier I had been carrying drink trays through a crowded ballroom. Now I was standing beside my manager while 2 men in tailored suits waited silently near the hotel entrance. Nobody explained anything. Nobody needed to. The rain had intensified outside, turning the city into a blur of reflected lights and moving shadows. My manager awkwardly adjusted his tie. Take tomorrow off, he said. Paid. I stared at him. Paid. Company decision. He immediately looked away. Definitely not a company decision. I stepped through the revolving doors and stopped beneath the covered entrance. A black sedan waited at the curb. Its headlights glowed softly through the rain. One of the suited men opened the rear passenger door. Miss Carter. I hesitated. Every warning my mother had ever taught me echoed inside my head. Do not get into cars with strangers. Do not trust powerful people simply because they seem polite. Do not walk into situations you do not understand. Unfortunately, tonight had already ignored every normal rule. I climbed inside. The leather seats smelled new. Warm air filled the cabin. The city drifted past the windows as we pulled away from the hotel. Nobody spoke during the first 10 minutes. I watched Manhattan slide by outside while my thoughts raced in circles. Eventually I could not stand the silence anymore. Are you going to tell me where we are going? The driver glanced into the mirror. Home. My home. Yes, ma'am. I relaxed slightly. At least Vincent was not having me transported to some mysterious location. That should not have felt like a victory, but somehow it did. 20 minutes later, the car turned onto my street in Queens. The familiar brick buildings and corner grocery store came into view. Relief washed through me. Then it disappeared just as quickly. A dark SUV sat parked across from my apartment building. Maybe it belonged to a neighbor. Maybe it was nothing. Yet something about it felt wrong. The sedan slowed. One of the men beside me quietly spoke into an earpiece. His posture changed instantly. More alert. More focused. My stomach tightened. What is it? I asked. Nobody answered immediately. The driver continued past my building instead of stopping. Wait, I said. You passed it. The man beside me finally looked over. There may be a small issue. My pulse quickened. What kind of issue? He hesitated. Someone has been asking questions about you tonight. Cold spread through my chest. Questions. Where you live. Where you work. What time your shifts end. The city suddenly felt much darker outside the window. Who? We do not know yet. I stared at him. Less than 6 hours ago I had been invisible. Forgettable. Just another waitress carrying trays through expensive rooms. Now strangers were apparently looking for information about me. The realization settled heavily in my stomach. The man glanced at his phone. A message had appeared on the screen. He read it once and his expression changed. Not fear. Concern. The controlled kind. The kind professionals try to hide. What happened? I asked. He looked directly at me. Miss Carter, he said carefully. Mr. Moretti would like you to stay somewhere else tonight. The words did not immediately make sense. Stay somewhere else tonight. I repeated them in my mind as the car continued moving through the wet streets of Queens. Outside, streetlights blurred into long reflections on the glass, and the city felt suddenly unfamiliar even though I had lived here for years. Somewhere else? I asked quietly. The man in the front passenger seat did not turn fully toward me. Yes, just for tonight. My fingers tightened together in my lap. I do not understand. I have work in the morning. There was a pause before he answered. Your safety comes first. That sentence should have comforted me. Instead, it made everything worse. I looked out the window again, watching familiar buildings pass by like strangers. Is this because of what happened at the hotel? I asked. No one answered immediately, which was answer enough. The car turned onto a wider avenue, moving faster now. I realized we were not going back to my apartment anymore. My heartbeat grew heavier. Where is Vincent Moretti? I asked. The driver finally spoke. He is handling the situation. That phrase meant nothing and everything at the same time. I pressed my palm against the window as the city lights streaked past. I do not want to stay. Somewhere else, I said more firmly. I want to go home. The man beside me turned slightly now. His expression calm but unreadable. Miss Carter, tonight your home is not secure. A cold silence followed those words. I stared at him, searching for exaggeration, for reassurance, for anything that suggested this was not real. But there was nothing. Only certainty. The car slowed again. We were entering a quieter part of the city, near the river where the buildings were older and the streets were less crowded. A second vehicle appeared behind us at a distance, matching our speed without approaching. I noticed it and immediately felt my stomach tighten. Are we being followed? I asked. The driver glanced once in the mirror. We are being escorted. That distinction did not help. The sedan eventually pulled into a private driveway beneath a modern building I did not recognize. Glass and steel, tall and quiet, with a security gate that opened automatically as we approached. The man beside me opened his door first and stepped out, scanning the surroundings before gesturing for me to follow. I hesitated before exiting the car. The air outside felt colder, sharper. Everything about this place felt controlled, protected, hidden from the rest of the city. Where am I? I asked. A secure location, he replied simply. We entered through a side entrance into a quiet lobby. No reception desk. No guests. Just soft lighting and polished floors. The elevator opened immediately as if it had been waiting for us. I stepped inside reluctantly. The doors closed and we began to rise. Is Vincent here? I asked again. The man finally looked at me directly. He will be. The elevator stopped on a high floor. When the doors opened, I saw him. Vincent Moretti stood at the end of a long hallway, hands in his pockets, suit jacket slightly undone, expression controlled but tense. For the first time since I had met him, he did not look untouchable. He looked like someone carrying responsibility that weighed too much. He walked toward me without rushing. The men escorting me stepped aside. The hallway felt suddenly too quiet. Are you all right? He asked. It was not a formal question. It was direct, personal. I nodded slowly. I think so. His eyes scanned my face for a moment longer than necessary. Then he spoke again. I should not have allowed you to leave alone. I frowned slightly. I was in a car with your people. That is not the same as safe. His answer was immediate. There was something different in his tone now. Less controlled. More honest. I studied him for a moment. Someone is looking for me, I said quietly. He did not deny it. That silence was confirmation. I swallowed. Why? Vincent finally looked away toward the glass wall at the end of the hallway, where the city lights stretched endlessly across Manhattan. Because you saw something you were not supposed to see, he said. Then he turned back to me. And because people like you are not usually noticed until it is too late. The words settled heavily between us. For the first time, I understood that my life had already changed long before I realized it. Sleep should have come easily that night. Instead, I stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the apartment overlooking Manhattan, watching rain drift across a city that suddenly felt much larger than it had 24 hours earlier. The skyline glowed beneath the clouds. Thousands of people moved through their lives below, unaware that a waitress from Queens was standing inside a place she never should have entered. Vincent remained nearby, giving me space without truly leaving. It was a strange kind of protection. Quiet, constant, real. Eventually I turned away from the glass. What happens tomorrow? I asked. Vincent looked up from the chair where he had been reading messages on his phone. Tomorrow you go back to your life. I laughed softly. I do not think I have that life anymore. For the first time that evening, something resembling a smile appeared. Small. Genuine. Maybe not exactly the same one. Silence settled between us again. Comfortable this time. Not awkward. Not forced. I studied him for a moment. The powerful man everyone watched. The man who could enter a ballroom and change the atmosphere simply by appearing. Yet sitting here now he seemed different. Less distant. More human. Can I ask you something? I said. You already have. I rolled my eyes. A serious question. Go ahead. I hesitated. Why are you doing all this? His expression grew thoughtful. He looked toward the city lights beyond the glass before answering. Because most people would have looked away. The simplicity of the response caught me off guard. Vincent stood and slowly crossed the room. He stopped several feet away, close enough for conversation, far enough to respect the space between us. Do you know what I see every day? He asked quietly. I shook my head. People protecting themselves. People protecting money. Reputation. Influence. Position. That is normal. That is expected. His eyes met mine. You protected a stranger. I looked down. I was scared. So was I. The admission surprised me. Vincent noticed my expression and nodded slightly. Not for myself. His voice lowered. For what it would mean if people stopped doing the right thing simply because it was inconvenient. The room fell silent again. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. For the first time all night, the clouds started breaking apart above the city. I thought about the gala. About carrying trays. About being ignored by nearly everyone in the room. I thought about the moment I almost stayed silent. The moment I almost convinced myself that none of it was my business. One decision. 3 seconds. That was all it had taken to change everything. I never expected any of this, I admitted. Vincent nodded. Neither did I. We stood there watching the city for a long moment. Then he spoke again. Everybody in that ballroom feared me. His voice was calm, honest. But you were the only person who tried to help me. I felt my chest tighten unexpectedly, not because of the words themselves, because he meant them. There was no performance, no strategy, just truth. The rain stopped completely. Beyond the glass, Manhattan shined beneath the first clear sky of the night. And as I stood there beside a man who could command entire rooms without raising his voice, I realized something important. Courage does not always belong to the strongest people. Sometimes it belongs to ordinary people who choose to act when everyone else decides to look away. And sometimes that choice changes more than one life.